Welcome to a gentle journey through time, where we will explore the ancient pathways that connected our world long before modern roads and highways existed. Tonight, we travel together along 30 of the most fascinating trade routes that shaped human civilization. These were not merely paths carved into earth and stone, but lifelines of culture, commerce, and connection that bound distant peoples together across impossible distances. Imagine caravans of camels moving slowly across endless deserts, their bells chiming softly in the night. Picture merchant ships with billowing sails gliding across moonlit seas, carrying treasures from lands unknown. These routes were the veins through which flowed not only silk and spices, but ideas, religions, art, and the very essence of human ambition and curiosity. As we move through each route, allow yourself to drift into the rhythm of ancient footsteps, the steady pace of traders who walked these paths centuries ago. Let the stories wash over you like a gentle tide, carrying you further into relaxation with each passing mile. There is no need to remember every detail, simply let the words guide you into peaceful rest. So settle yourself comfortably, close your eyes if you wish, and let us begin our slow, peaceful journey through history. We start where East met West, on the most legendary route of all. One, the Silk Road, China to Mediterranean. The Silk Road was not a single road, but rather a vast network of interconnected pathways stretching over 4,000 miles from the ancient capital of Chang'an in China to the Mediterranean Sea. This legendary route earned its name from the precious silk that Chinese merchants carried westward, a fabric so luxurious that Roman emperors paid its weight in gold. The journey along the Silk Road could take years to complete, with caravans stopping at oasis towns nestled between harsh deserts and towering mountain ranges. Merchants did not typically travel the entire length of the route. Instead, goods passed through many hands, moving from trader to trader across different regions. This created a remarkable chain of cultural exchange that transformed civilizations. Along with silk, the route carried jade, porcelain, tea, and gunpowder from the east. From the west came glassware, wool, gold, and silver. But perhaps more valuable than any physical goods were the ideas that traveled these paths. Buddhism spread from India to China along these routes. Mathematical concepts, astronomical knowledge, and artistic techniques flowed in both directions. The cities along the Silk Road became melting pots of culture. Samarkand, Bukhara, and Kashgar thrived as cosmopolitan centers where Chinese, Persian, Indian, and Greek influences mingled. Caravanserais, which were roadside inns, provided shelter and safety for travelers crossing dangerous territories. The route faced constant threats from bandits, harsh weather, and difficult terrain, yet it persisted for over 1,500 years, shaping the world as we know it today. The Silk Road finally declined when maritime routes became safer and more efficient. 2. The Incense route, Arabia to Mediterranean. The Incense route wound its way through the Arabian Peninsula, carrying one of the ancient world's most precious commodities, frankincense and myrrh. These aromatic resins came primarily from the southern regions of Arabia, particularly what is now Yemen and Oman, where special trees produced the fragrant sap. The demand for these substances was extraordinary, as they were essential for religious ceremonies, funeral rites, and as luxury perfumes throughout the Mediterranean world and beyond. The journey from southern Arabia to Mediterranean ports covered approximately 2,000 miles through some of the harshest desert terrain on Earth. Caravans of camels, sometimes numbering in the thousands, would travel for months, stopping at oasis settlements where merchants paid taxes and tributes to local rulers. The Nabateans, an Arab people, controlled much of this trade and grew fabulously wealthy from it. Their capital city, Petra, carved magnificently into rose-red cliffs, stood as a testament to the riches generated by incense trade. Frankincense and myrrh were worth more than gold in ancient times. Egyptian pharaohs used them in mummification processes and temple ceremonies. Romans burned vast quantities in religious rituals and funeral pyres. The wealthy used these resins as status symbols, perfuming their homes and bodies. The Bible mentions these precious substances repeatedly, most famously as gifts brought to the infant Jesus by the 3 wise men. The route required sophisticated organization and protection. Merchant guilds developed complex systems of credit and partnership. Way stations provided water, food, and security. The trade enriched kingdoms along the route and created diplomatic relationships that lasted centuries, until sea routes eventually made overland transport less profitable. 3. The Amber Road, Baltic Sea to Mediterranean. Amber, fossilized tree resin from ancient forests, glowed with warm golden hues that captivated ancient peoples. The Amber Road connected the cold shores of the Baltic Sea, where amber washed up on beaches, to the warm Mediterranean civilizations that prized it above almost all other materials. This route existed since prehistoric times, with archaeological evidence suggesting amber trade dating back 6,000 years. The journey from Baltic beaches to Mediterranean markets covered roughly 2,000 miles through Central Europe. Amber pieces, worn smooth by ocean waves, were collected by coastal peoples and passed southward through networks of traders. The route followed major river valleys, including the Vistula and the Danube, which provided natural corridors through dense forests and mountain ranges. Multiple branches of the Amber Road existed, with different paths leading to various Mediterranean destinations. Ancient Greeks and Romans believed amber possessed magical properties. They called it electron because rubbing it created static electricity, a phenomenon that seemed supernatural. Wealthy Romans wore amber jewelry and carved it into decorative objects. Germanic tribes in the north valued Mediterranean goods like bronze tools, fine pottery, and wine, creating a mutually beneficial exchange that persisted for millennia. Or the amber trade created cultural connections between vastly different societies. Northern European tribes learned metalworking techniques from southern civilizations. Mediterranean artistic styles influenced northern craftwork. The route also served as a pathway for ideas, technologies, and even genetic exchange through intermarriage between trading communities. Amber remained valuable throughout the Roman period, and some sources claim Emperor Nero sent expeditions specifically to secure amber supplies, demonstrating how deeply this golden substance was woven into ancient life. 4. The Royal Road, Persia. The Royal Road was an engineering marvel of the ancient Persian Empire, commissioned by King Darius I around 500 BCE. Stretching approximately 1,600 miles from Susa in Persia to Sardis near the Aegean Sea, this road represented one of the first examples of state-sponsored infrastructure designed specifically to facilitate communication and trade across a vast empire. The road passed through diverse landscapes, from arid plateaus to fertile valleys, connecting the heart of Persia with its western territories. What made the Royal Road revolutionary was its systematic organization. The Persians established a network of stations positioned approximately every 15 miles along the route. These stations, called chaparkhane, provided fresh horses, food, and accommodation for royal messengers and authorized travelers. This system allowed messages to travel the entire length of the road in just 7 days, a speed that would not be matched until the invention of the telegraph over 2,000 years later. The Greek historian Herodotus marveled at this efficiency, writing that neither snow, rain, heat, nor darkness stopped these couriers from completing their appointed rounds. The road served multiple purposes beyond communication. It facilitated tax collection, military movement, and commercial trade throughout the empire. Merchants could travel with relative safety under Persian protection, paying tolls at various points. The road surface itself varied, with some sections paved with stone while others remained packed earth. Bridges crossed rivers and mountain passes were carefully maintained. The Royal Road influenced later infrastructure projects, including Roman roads. It demonstrated how centralized authority could create networks that bound distant regions together, transforming isolated communities into parts of a greater whole. The concept of rapid communication through relay stations inspired postal systems worldwide. 5. The Trans-Saharan trade routes, North Africa to Sub-Saharan Africa. The Sahara Desert, largest hot desert on Earth, seems an impossible barrier between northern and sub-Saharan Africa. Yet ancient peoples developed trade routes across this vast sea of sand, connecting Mediterranean civilizations with the wealthy kingdoms of West Africa. These routes were lifelines of commerce that carried gold, salt, slaves, and ideas across one of the planet's most inhospitable environments. The journey across the Sahara took months and tested human endurance to its absolute limits. Salt and gold drove this trade. West African kingdoms controlled rich gold deposits but desperately needed salt for preserving food and maintaining health in tropical climates. North African peoples had abundant salt from Saharan mines but coveted the gold that could make them wealthy. This created a perfect economic exchange that sustained trade for over 1,000 years. The value of salt in some West African markets rivaled that of gold, with blocks of salt serving as currency. Camels made trans-Saharan trade possible. These remarkable animals, introduced to North Africa around 300 CE, could travel for days without water and carry heavy loads across scorching sands. Caravans often included hundreds or even thousands of camels, moving in coordinated groups for safety and efficiency. Travelers navigated by stars and followed ancient knowledge of where oases lay hidden among the dunes. Cities like Timbuktu, Gao, and Sijil Masa flourished as major trading centers where caravans gathered. These cities became centers of learning and culture, with universities and libraries that preserved knowledge. The routes also spread Islam southward into West Africa, transforming religious and cultural landscapes. The trade enriched kingdoms like Ghana, Mali, and Songhai, creating some of Africa's most powerful empires. 6. The spice routes, India to Europe. Spices were the gold of the ancient culinary world, and the routes that carried them from India and Southeast Asia to European markets were among history's most profitable trade networks. Black pepper, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, and cardamom could transform bland food into feasts, preserve meat, and serve as medicines. European nobility would pay extraordinary prices for these aromatic substances that grew only in distant tropical lands. The search for spices would eventually drive the age of exploration and reshape world history. The spice routes were primarily maritime, though overland connections existed. Ships sailed from the Malabar coast of India, from Ceylon, and from the fabled Spice Islands of Indonesia. These vessels navigated using monsoon winds, which blew predictably in different directions depending on the season. Sailors learned to time their voyages to catch favorable winds, making the Indian Ocean a highway of commerce for millennia. Arab merchants dominated much of this trade, serving as intermediaries between Asian producers and European consumers. They guarded the secrets of spice origins carefully, sometimes spreading fantastical tales about how spices were obtained to maintain their monopoly. Spices reached Europe through multiple routes, passing through Persian Gulf ports, Red Sea harbors, or overland through Central Asia. The value of spices in medieval Europe cannot be overstated. A pound of saffron cost the same as a horse. Peppercorns were used to pay rent and taxes. Wealthy families displayed spices at banquets as status symbols. This demand created fortunes for merchants and motivated European powers to seek direct access to spice sources. The Portuguese circumnavigation of Africa and Columbus' westward voyage were both fundamentally about finding new routes to the lands of spices. 7. The Tea-Horse Road, China to Tibet. High in the mountains where China meets Tibet, an ancient pathway wound through some of the world's most dramatic landscapes. This was the Tea-Horse Road, also called the Southern Silk Road, connecting the tea-producing regions of Yunnan and Sichuan provinces with the Tibetan Plateau and beyond. The route existed for over 1,300 years, facilitating a unique exchange: Chinese tea for Tibetan horses. Both commodities were essential to their respective civilizations, creating a trade relationship that transcended simple commerce. Chinese dynasties desperately needed horses for military campaigns, particularly strong Tibetan breeds that could endure harsh conditions and high altitudes. The Tibetan Plateau produced these remarkable animals naturally, but lacked the tea that had become essential to Tibetan culture. Tea helped Tibetans digest their butter-heavy diet and provided warmth and energy in the thin, cold mountain air. Compressed tea bricks became a form of currency throughout the region. The journey along the Tea-Horse Road was extraordinarily difficult. Traders navigated narrow paths carved into cliff faces, crossed rope bridges swaying over deep gorges, and climbed passes exceeding 15,000 feet in elevation. Caravans moved slowly, with porters and pack animals carefully picking their way through treacherous terrain. A single journey could take months and claimed many lives. Weather could change violently, with sudden snowstorms or landslides blocking passages. The route connected diverse ethnic groups including Han Chinese, Yi, Bai, Naxi, and Tibetan peoples. This created rich cultural exchanges and the development of unique traditions in communities along the path. Ancient towns like Lijiang and Dali became multicultural centers where different languages, religions, and customs mingled. The Tea-Horse Road declined only in the 20th century, when modern roads finally penetrated these remote regions. 8. The Salt Route, Central Europe. Salt, humble and common to us today, was once precious enough to spark wars and build cities. The Salt Route, or Via Salaria in Latin, was actually many different routes throughout Europe, all dedicated to moving this essential mineral from production sites to populations that needed it. Salt preserved food in ages before refrigeration, making survival through long winters possible. It was so valuable that Roman soldiers received part of their pay in salt, giving us the word salary. The most famous salt routes ran through Central Europe, particularly from salt mines in the Alps and deposits in Germany and Poland. The city of Salzburg, whose name literally means salt castle, grew wealthy from controlling alpine salt production. Hallstatt, another Austrian town, had salt mines dating back 3,000 years, and the entire Hallstatt culture of prehistoric Europe is named after this salt trading center. Transporting salt required careful organization. In Bavaria and Austria, salt was loaded onto barges and floated down rivers, with elaborate systems of docks and warehouses managing the flow. Overland routes used wagons specially designed to protect salt from moisture. Some routes developed into major trade arteries where salt shared space with other goods, creating prosperous trading networks throughout medieval Europe. Control of salt sources meant political and economic power. Cities located along salt routes could levy taxes on passing merchants, accumulating wealth that built cathedrals and funded art. The Hanseatic League, a powerful medieval trade alliance, dealt heavily in salt from Lüneburg. Wars were fought over access to salt deposits and trade routes. The Gabelle, a French salt tax, became so hated that it contributed to the conditions leading to the French Revolution. Salt routes shaped settlement patterns, with towns growing specifically to serve the salt trade. 9. The Tin Route, Cornwall to Mediterranean. Bronze, the metal that gave an entire age its name, requires two components: copper and tin. While copper was relatively common in the ancient world, tin was rare and precious. The southwestern tip of Britain, Cornwall, held some of Europe's richest tin deposits. and Phoenician traders sailing from the Mediterranean established routes to obtain this crucial metal as early as 2000 BCE. This tin route represented one of the earliest long-distance maritime trade networks in European history. The journey from Cornwall to Mediterranean civilizations was perilous. Phoenician ships and later Greek and Roman vessels had to navigate the unpredictable Atlantic waters, pass through the Strait of Gibraltar, and either sail up the Atlantic coast or cross overland through what is now France. Evidence suggests multiple routes existed, with some tin traveling overland to Mediterranean ports, while other shipments went entirely by sea. The exact routes were closely guarded secrets, with traders deliberately spreading misinformation about the source of their tin. Ancient writers referred to the Tin Islands, or Cassiterides, with an air of mystery, uncertain of their exact location. This vagueness was intentional, protecting the monopoly of merchants who controlled the tin trade. The metal was so valuable that Phoenician traders allegedly once ran their ship aground rather than let Roman vessels follow them to their tin sources. Cornwall's tin made Bronze Age civilization possible across the Mediterranean, enabling the creation of weapons, tools, and artistic works. The tin trade brought Cornwall into contact with sophisticated Mediterranean cultures thousands of years ago. Archaeological evidence shows Mediterranean goods reaching Britain and British tin appearing in Bronze Age sites throughout the Mediterranean. This early globalization connected distant peoples in ways that shaped technological development across entire continents. 10. The Jade Road, Central Asia. Jade, a stone prized above gold in Chinese culture, came from the far western reaches of the Chinese world, primarily from the Kunlun Mountains near what is now Khotan in Xinjiang. The Jade Road, which predated even the Silk Road, connected these remote jade sources with Chinese civilization, where the stone was believed to possess spiritual and protective properties. For thousands of years, jade journeyed eastward along dangerous mountain paths, its value increasing with every mile traveled. The Chinese relationship with jade went far beyond mere appreciation of beauty. Jade was thought to preserve bodies after death, ensure good fortune, and symbolize virtue and purity. The finest jade, called mutton fat jade for its pale, creamy color, was reserved for emperors. Jade objects were essential in religious rituals and served as symbols of authority. Craftsmen spent lifetimes learning to work this extremely hard stone, creating intricate carvings, ritual vessels, and jewelry. The journey from Kunlun mountain sources to Chinese workshops was extremely difficult. Miners worked in harsh conditions at high altitudes, extracting jade from rivers and mountainsides. The stone then traveled along treacherous paths through the Taklamakan Desert, one of the world's most inhospitable regions. Caravans carrying jade had to navigate between oasis towns, always vulnerable to sandstorms and raiders. The Jade Road also carried other goods and facilitated cultural exchange between Chinese and Central Asian peoples. Buddhism traveled this route into China, and Chinese influence spread westward. The cities along the Jade Road, such as Khotan itself, became centers of art and learning where multiple cultures intersected. The jade trade persisted for over 4,000 years, making it one of the longest-lasting trade routes in human history, and Chinese reverence for jade continues unchanged today. 11. The Grand Trunk Road, South Asia. Stretching over 1,500 miles from Bengal in eastern India to Peshawar in what is now Pakistan, the Grand Trunk Road has been called the longest road in the Indian subcontinent and one of Asia's oldest and most important trade routes. Though the road was significantly expanded and improved by various rulers, particularly the Mughal Emperor Sher Shah Suri in the 16th century, its origins reach back over 2,000 years. This route connected diverse regions, languages, religions, and cultures, serving as the spine of South Asian civilization. The road passed through fertile river valleys across the vast Indo-Gangetic plain and approached the mountain passes leading to Central Asia. Along its length stood some of India's greatest cities: Dhaka, Kolkata, Varanasi, Allahabad, Delhi, Amritsar, and Lahore. Each had distinctive character, yet all were connected by this vital artery. Merchants traveled its length carrying textiles, spices, gems, and agricultural products. Pilgrims walked it to reach sacred sites, armies marched along it, and empires rose and fell with control of this crucial route. Sher Shah Suri's improvements made the Grand Trunk Road remarkably sophisticated. He constructed caravanserais every few miles, providing shelter, food, and security. Wells were dug at regular intervals. Trees were planted to provide shade. The road was wide enough for carts to pass each other, and milestones marked distances. A postal system allowed messages to travel its length efficiently. These innovations made travel safer and faster than ever before. The Grand Trunk Road facilitated cultural exchange on an enormous scale. Ideas, languages, artistic styles, and religions flowed along it. The route helped spread Buddhism, Hinduism, and later Islam throughout the subcontinent. British colonial powers recognized its importance and further developed it. Today, portions of the Grand Trunk Road still function as major highways. 12. The Maritime Silk Road, Indian Ocean. While caravans trudged across Central Asian deserts on the overland Silk Road, ships sailed the Maritime Silk Road across the Indian Ocean, connecting China with India, the Arabian Peninsula, and East Africa. This sea route was in many ways more efficient and profitable than its overland counterpart, carrying larger quantities of goods more quickly and safely. The Maritime Silk Road existed for over 2,000 years and shaped the development of coastal civilizations throughout the Indian Ocean world. Chinese ships, particularly the famous junks with their distinctive battened sails, were among the most advanced vessels of their time. During the Ming Dynasty, Admiral Zheng He led massive fleets on expeditions throughout the Indian Ocean, with ships far larger than anything Europeans would build for centuries. These voyages demonstrated Chinese naval capability and established diplomatic and trade relationships throughout the region. However, most trade was conducted by smaller vessels making shorter journeys, with goods passing through many hands. The Maritime Silk Road carried silk, porcelain, and tea from China. India exported cotton textiles, spices, and precious stones. Southeast Asia provided exotic woods, resins, and more spices. The Arabian Peninsula offered frankincense and myrrh. East Africa contributed ivory, gold, and exotic animals. The exchange was not merely commercial but deeply cultural. Islam spread along these routes, creating Muslim communities throughout Southeast Asia and coastal China. Artistic styles influenced distant regions, and languages absorbed words from trading partners. Monsoon winds governed the rhythm of this trade. Ships sailed westward with winter monsoons and returned eastward with summer monsoons. This seasonal pattern meant merchants often spent months in foreign ports, waiting for favorable winds. This led to the establishment of diaspora communities, with Arab, Indian, and Chinese merchants settling in ports throughout the Indian Ocean, creating cosmopolitan cities. 13. The Varangian route, Scandinavia to Byzantium. The Varangian route, also called the route from the Varangians to the Greeks, connected the Baltic Sea with the Black Sea and ultimately Constantinople, capital of the Byzantine Empire. This route was pioneered and dominated by Scandinavian traders and warriors known as Varangians, who were Vikings from Sweden. Unlike the Vikings who sailed west to raid and settle in Britain and France, these Eastern Vikings traveled the river systems of what is now Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus, seeking trade and fortune in the wealthy lands to the south. The journey from Scandinavia to Byzantium involved navigating a complex network of rivers, including the Volkhov, Dnieper, and Volga. Between these river systems lay portages where ships and cargo had to be carried overland, sometimes for considerable distances. The Varangians used light, shallow-drafted boats that could be transported relatively easily. They faced constant dangers from rapids, particularly the famous Dnieper Rapids, where boats had to be carefully guided through or portaged around treacherous waters while remaining vulnerable to attack from Pecheneg nomads. The Varangians traded furs, amber, honey, wax, and slaves captured in raids or purchased from Slavic tribes. In return, they obtained Byzantine silver coins, silks, wine, and luxury goods from the south. These Scandinavian merchants established trading posts that grew into important cities. Novgorod and Kiev began as Varangian settlements and became major centers of power. The Varangian influence on early Russian history was profound, with Scandinavian rulers establishing the first Russian state. The Varangian Guard, an elite unit of Scandinavian warriors serving Byzantine emperors, represented the ultimate culmination of this route. These warriors could earn fortunes in Byzantine service, then return home wealthy men. The route declined as other trade paths became more important, and political changes disrupted the river systems. 14. The lapis lazuli route, Afghanistan to Egypt. Deep blue lapis lazuli, a semi-precious stone flecked with gold-like pyrite, has captivated humans for over 6,000 years. The finest lapis lazuli came from mines in Badakhshan, Afghanistan, particularly the Sari Sang mines that are still operating today. From these remote mountain locations, the vivid blue stone traveled thousands of miles along ancient trade routes, reaching Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Indus Valley civilization. Lapis lazuli was so prized that it appeared in the death mask of Tutankhamun and adorned Sumerian temples. The journey from Afghan mountains to distant civilizations was arduous and dangerous. The mines themselves sat at high elevations in difficult terrain, making extraction challenging. From Badakhshan, lapis traveled south through mountain passes into the Indus Valley or west toward Mesopotamian cities like Ur and Babylon. Some lapis continued even further, reaching Egypt, where it was especially valued. The stone's rarity and the difficulty of obtaining it made lapis lazuli more valuable than gold in some ancient civilizations. Ancient peoples attributed magical and healing properties to lapis lazuli. Egyptians ground it into powder to create ultramarine pigment for paintings and eye makeup. Mesopotamian cylinder seals were carved from lapis. The stone appeared in religious texts and was associated with the heavens because of its celestial blue color. Possession of lapis lazuli indicated wealth, power, and connection to divine forces. The lapis lazuli trade created economic and cultural connections between distant civilizations during the Bronze Age. Archaeological discoveries of lapis lazuli objects revealed trade networks spanning thousands of miles, demonstrating that even in prehistoric times, humans created far-reaching commerce systems. The trade in this beautiful stone continued for millennia, with lapis lazuli remaining valuable in Islamic art and Renaissance painting, where ground lapis created the most expensive blue pigment available. 15. The obsidian trade routes, Anatolia. Obsidian, volcanic glass that fractures into incredibly sharp edges, was the most valuable material for tools and weapons before the development of metalworking. Natural obsidian sources were rare and geographically limited to volcanic regions, yet obsidian artifacts appear at archaeological sites thousands of miles from any volcano. This distribution reveals extensive prehistoric trade networks, with Anatolia in modern Turkey serving as one of the most important obsidian sources for the ancient Near East. The obsidian sources in central Anatolia, particularly around the volcanoes of Cappadocia, produced high-quality material that Neolithic peoples prized above all other stone. When struck correctly, obsidian produced edges sharper than modern surgical steel, making it ideal for cutting tools, arrowheads, spear points, and scrapers. Beyond functionality, obsidian's glossy black or reddish appearance made it attractive for decorative items and mirrors. Some cultures attributed spiritual significance to this stone born from volcanic fire. Obsidian trade routes extended from Anatolia throughout the Fertile Crescent, reaching Mesopotamian cities, Levantine settlements, and even across water to Cyprus. Archaeological analysis using techniques that identify the chemical signature of obsidian from different sources has revealed that a single Anatolian source might supply settlements hundreds of miles away. This demonstrates that even in the Neolithic period, over 8,000 years ago, humans had developed reliable trade networks. The obsidian trade represents some of humanity's earliest long-distance commerce. These routes predated writing, cities, and agriculture in many regions. Obsidian's distribution pattern helps archaeologists understand prehistoric social organization, exchange systems, and cultural contacts. The individuals who transported obsidian might have been specialized traders or travelers moving between communities with multiple purposes. When metal tools eventually replaced obsidian, these ancient trade routes had already established pathways that later commerce would follow for millennia. 16. The Turquoise Trail, American Southwest. Long before European contact, Native American peoples of the American Southwest developed extensive trade networks centered around turquoise, a blue-green stone they considered sacred and powerful. The primary turquoise sources lay in what is now New Mexico, particularly near Cerrillos, where mines dating back over 1,000 years still show evidence of ancient extraction. From these desert sources, turquoise traveled along well-established trails reaching as far south as Mesoamerica and throughout the pueblos and settlements of the Southwest. Turquoise held profound spiritual significance for Southwestern peoples. The stone represented sky, water, and life itself in arid lands where water was precious. Pueblo peoples crafted turquoise into jewelry, ceremonial objects, and offerings to deities. The stone was believed to bring protection, health, and connection to spiritual forces. Shamans and leaders wore turquoise as symbols of authority and divine favor. The most valued turquoise displayed deep blue color with minimal matrix, though preferences varied among different cultures. The Turquoise Trail connected diverse cultures across vast distances. Chaco Canyon, the great ceremonial center of the ancestral Puebloans, served as a major hub where turquoise and other goods were exchanged. Archaeological evidence shows turquoise from New Mexico appearing in sites throughout Mexico, including Teotihuacan and Maya cities, demonstrating trade networks spanning over 2,000 miles. In return, Southwestern peoples received macaw feathers, cacao, copper bells, and shell ornaments from the South. The turquoise trade required sophisticated social organization. Miners extracted stone using stone tools, a labor-intensive process requiring specialized knowledge. Traders traveled dangerous routes through deserts and mountains, relying on knowledge of water sources and safe passages. The exchange created cultural bonds and shared traditions across regions. When Spanish conquistadors arrived, they found turquoise trade networks still functioning, testament to systems that had operated successfully for over a millennium. 17. The Copper Route, Cyprus to Ancient World. Cyprus, the island whose very name may derive from the word for copper, was the ancient Mediterranean's primary copper source. The metal was so abundant and so associated with the island that Romans called copper as cyprium, meaning metal of Cyprus, which eventually became cuprum and gives us our modern word. From approximately 3000 BCE onwards, Cypriot copper traveled throughout the Mediterranean and Near East, making the island strategically and economically vital to Bronze Age civilizations. Copper mining on Cyprus was extensive and sophisticated. Ancient miners dug deep shafts and galleries, following copper-bearing ore veins into the earth. The smelting process required temperatures exceeding 1000 degrees, achieved through carefully designed furnaces and bellows. Cypriot metalworkers developed advanced techniques, producing copper ingots shaped like ox hides, each weighing about 30 kilograms. These distinctive ingots appear in ancient shipwrecks and artwork throughout the Mediterranean, serving as a standard unit of trade. The copper routes from Cyprus were primarily maritime. Ships loaded with copper ingots sailed to Egypt, where the metal was essential for tools, weapons, and religious objects. They traveled to the Levantine coast, supplying cities like Ugarit and Byblos. Aegean civilizations, including the Minoans and Mycenaeans, depended heavily on Cypriot copper. The Hittite Empire in Anatolia sought to control Cyprus to secure copper supplies for their military. This competition made Cyprus a contested prize, with various powers attempting to dominate the island. The importance of Cypriot copper cannot be overstated for Bronze Age civilization. Bronze, an alloy of copper and tin, was superior to pure copper for weapons and tools. Control of copper sources meant military and economic advantage. The copper trade created wealth that supported artistic achievement, monumental architecture, and complex societies throughout the ancient Mediterranean world. 18. The purple dye route, Phoenician Mediterranean. The Phoenicians, master mariners from the eastern Mediterranean coast, controlled one of antiquity's most lucrative trades, purple dye extracted from murex sea snails. This rare dye, called Tyrian purple, after the Phoenician city of Tyre, produced colors ranging from deep crimson to violet. The dye was extraordinarily expensive because producing just 1 gram required thousands of snails. Purple-dyed cloth became the ultimate status symbol, worn exclusively by royalty, high priests, and the wealthiest citizens. The word purple became synonymous with imperial power. Phoenician ships sailed throughout the Mediterranean, establishing colonies and trading posts to facilitate the purple dye trade. Cities like Carthage in North Africa and Gades in Spain began as Phoenician settlements supporting this commerce. The Phoenicians jealously guarded the secrets of dye production, maintaining a profitable monopoly for centuries. The process was unpleasant. Rotting snails produced a terrible stench that made dye workshops notorious. Workers extracted tiny amounts of mucus from each snail, then processed it through complex chemical procedures involving fermentation and exposure to sunlight. The purple dye trade made Phoenician cities fabulously wealthy. Tyre and Sidon became major commercial powers, their merchants traveling from Britain to the Red Sea. They developed advanced shipbuilding techniques and navigation skills, becoming the ancient world's premier sailors. Phoenician traders carried not just dye but glass, cedar wood from Lebanon, wine, and manufactured goods throughout the Mediterranean. The cultural impact extended beyond commerce. Phoenician trade networks spread their alphabet, which became the basis for Greek and Latin scripts. Their maritime knowledge influenced later civilizations. Roman emperors maintained the tradition of purple as an imperial color, with laws restricting who could wear it. The dye remained valuable until synthetic dyes were developed in the 19th century. 19. The myrrh and frankincense trail, Horn of Africa. The Horn of Africa, particularly modern Somalia and parts of Ethiopia, produced some of the ancient world's finest frankincense and myrrh alongside the Arabian Peninsula. These aromatic resins came from Boswellia and Commiphora trees growing in the region's arid highlands. The trail carrying these precious substances from African sources wound northward through difficult terrain toward Red Sea ports, then onward to Mediterranean markets. This route enriched kingdoms that controlled it and played a crucial role in ancient global trade. Ancient Egyptians particularly valued frankincense and myrrh from the Horn of Africa, which they called the Land of Punt. Egyptian records describe trading expeditions to Punt dating back to 2500 BCE, seeking frankincense for temple ceremonies and myrrh for mummification. Queen Hatshepsut's mortuary temple depicts her famous expedition to Punt, showing ships returning loaded with incense trees, gold, and exotic animals. The exact location of Punt remains debated, but most scholars place it in the Horn of Africa. Harvesting frankincense and myrrh required specialized knowledge. Workers made careful incisions in tree bark, allowing resin to seep out and harden. The solidified tears of resin were then collected, graded by quality, and prepared for transport. The best frankincense produced clear, pale droplets that burned with minimal smoke and maximum fragrance. Lower grades served various purposes, from cheaper incense to medicines. The trade routes from the Horn of Africa connected with networks leading to Arabia, Egypt, and eventually the entire Mediterranean world. Cities along the Somali coast prospered as entrepôts where frankincense and myrrh were consolidated for shipment. The Kingdom of Aksum in Ethiopia grew powerful partly through controlling this trade. The routes remained important for millennia, with frankincense and myrrh still harvested traditionally in the region today. 20. The Hanseatic trade route, Northern Europe. The Hanseatic League was a commercial and defensive confederation of merchant guilds and market towns that dominated Baltic and North Sea trade from the 13th to 17th centuries. Though not ancient in the same sense as other routes, the Hanseatic network followed and formalized trading patterns established centuries earlier. The League connected over 200 cities, from London and Bruges in the west to Novgorod in the east, creating a vast commercial empire based on cooperation rather than military conquest. The Hanseatic routes carried diverse commodities essential to medieval European life. From the Baltic came timber for shipbuilding, amber for jewelry, grain from Polish and German lands, furs from Russia, and wax for candles. The critically important herring fisheries off the Scandinavian coast provided protein that could be preserved and shipped throughout Europe. From the west came cloth from Flanders, wine from the Rhineland, and salt for preserving fish and meat. The League also traded in more exotic goods arriving from other routes, serving as distributors throughout Northern Europe. Hanseatic merchants developed sophisticated business practices. They established contours, which were enclosed trading posts in foreign cities, where Hanseatic merchants lived according to their own laws. The most famous contours were in Bergen, London, Bruges, and Novgorod. These settlements functioned as small German towns within host cities, maintaining warehouses, offices, and living quarters. The League enforced quality standards, negotiated trade privileges, and sometimes used economic boycotts or military force to protect member interests. The Hanseatic League's success came from collective action and efficiency. Member cities built specialized vessels called cogs for Baltic trade. They standardized weights, measures, and commercial practices. The League maintained lighthouses and navigational aids, making sea travel safer. This cooperation created prosperity throughout Northern Europe and demonstrated that commercial networks could rival territorial empires in wealth and influence. 21. The Via Maris, coastal Levant. The Via Maris, Latin for Way of the Sea, was one of the ancient Near East's most important routes, connecting Egypt with Mesopotamia along the Mediterranean coast through the Levantine corridor. This route existed for over 3,000 years, witnessing the rise and fall of countless civilizations. Egyptian pharaohs, Assyrian kings, Persian emperors, and Roman legions all marched along the Via Maris, making it as much a military highway as a commercial road. The route's strategic importance meant that controlling it often meant controlling the region. The Via Maris began in the Nile Delta, crossed northern Sinai, and followed the Mediterranean coast through Gaza, Ashkelon, Jaffa, and northward into what is now Lebanon and Syria. At Megiddo, a crucial junction, the route split, with branches heading toward Damascus and onward to Mesopotamia. The location of Megiddo was so strategically vital that it became the site of numerous battles throughout history. The Bible's book of Revelation uses Armageddon, derived from Har Megiddo meaning Hill of Megiddo as the site of the final battle, reflecting the location's association with warfare. Merchants traveling the Via Maris carried goods between three great civilizations: Egypt, the Levantine city-states, and Mesopotamia. Egyptian grain, papyrus, and gold moved northward. Cedar wood from Lebanon, olive oil, wine, and manufactured goods traveled in multiple directions. Mesopotamian textiles, metals, and luxury items moved westward. The route facilitated not just trade but cultural exchange, with ideas, technologies, and religious concepts spreading along it. The Via Maris connected some of history's most significant cities. Gaza served as a gateway between Africa and Asia. Cities like Tyre and Sidon grew wealthy from trade passing through. The route remained important through Roman and Byzantine periods, with portions still serving as modern highways connecting the same regions their ancient predecessors linked. 22. The King's Highway, Jordan and Levant. The King's Highway was an ancient trade route running north-south through what is now Jordan, connecting the Gulf of Aqaba with Damascus in Syria. This route was already ancient when mentioned in the Hebrew Bible, where Moses requested permission from the Edomite king to pass along it during the Israelite Exodus. The route passed through dramatically beautiful and strategically important terrain, including deep wadis, desert plateaus, and mountain ridges overlooking the Jordan Valley and Dead Sea. The King's Highway served as the main north-south route through Transjordan for over 2,000 years. It connected a series of kingdoms and city-states: Edom in the south, Moab in the central region, Ammon near modern Amman, and eventually Damascus in the north. The route climbed steeply from sea level at the Dead Sea to elevations exceeding 3,000 feet on the plateau, making travel physically demanding, but providing natural defensive positions for settlements along it. Trade goods moving along the King's Highway included frankincense and myrrh from Arabia, spices from India arriving at Red Sea ports, copper from mines in the Arabah Valley, and agricultural products from the fertile highlands. The route also carried pilgrims to religious sites and armies marching to war. During the Roman period, Emperor Trajan renovated and expanded the route, calling it the Via Nova Traiana. Roman milestones still stand along portions of the highway, marking distances between cities. The cities along the King's Highway included some of history's most fascinating places. Petra, the rose-red city of the Nabateans carved into canyon walls, grew wealthy, controlling trade along this route. The Crusader castles of Kerak and Shobak dominated strategic positions, attempting to control and tax caravans. The highway remained important through Islamic periods, with pilgrims using it to reach Mecca. Today, Jordan's modern highway system still follows much of the ancient King's Highway route. 23. The steppe route, Eurasian grasslands. The vast grasslands stretching from Hungary to Manchuria, known as the Eurasian steppe, served as a highway for nomadic peoples for thousands of years. The steppe route was less a fixed road than a broad corridor, where horse-riding pastoral peoples moved seasonally with their herds and also facilitated trade between east and west. This route predated the Silk Road and continued alongside it, often intersecting at key locations. The steppe nomads, including Scythians, Sarmatians, Huns, Turks, and Mongols, were not merely raiders but also essential intermediaries in trans-Eurasian trade. The steppe route's geography made it distinctively different from other trade routes. The grasslands provided pasture for animals, meaning caravans could travel with less concern about carrying fodder. However, the route offered little shelter from weather extremes with scorching summers and brutal winters. Water sources were crucial and well known to those familiar with the terrain. The flat, open landscape allowed rapid movement but also left travelers vulnerable to attack, making armed protection essential. Nomadic peoples played a complex role in steppe trade. They served as guides and protectors for merchants crossing their territories, extracting taxes and tribute. They also traded their own products, horses, leather, felt, and animal products like wool and fur. Chinese silk and other goods moved westward through nomadic hands, while Western goods traveled east. The nomads developed sophisticated diplomatic relationships with settled civilizations, sometimes raiding them, but also engaging in mutually beneficial trade. The steppe route facilitated more than commercial exchange. Technologies spread rapidly across the grasslands: bronze working, chariot construction, horseback riding innovations, and later the stirrup, which revolutionized cavalry warfare. Artistic styles and motifs, particularly animal art, spread throughout the steppe world. Diseases also traveled these routes, with the Black Death likely following steppe paths into Europe. The Mongol Empire's rise demonstrated the steppe's power when unified under strong leadership. Twanaphoto, the Tin Islands route, Atlantic coast. Ancient Mediterranean civilization spoke mysteriously of the Tin Islands, or Cassiterides, located somewhere beyond the Pillars of Hercules in the distant Atlantic. Modern scholars believe these references likely pointed to Cornwall and possibly Brittany, where tin deposits were mined from ancient times. Phoenician traders ventured into the Atlantic to obtain tin, keeping their routes deliberately secret to maintain their monopoly on this crucial metal. The journey to these remote sources was dangerous and legendary, pushing the boundaries of ancient maritime capability. Tin from Atlantic sources reached Mediterranean markets through multiple possible routes. Phoenician ships may have sailed directly along Atlantic coasts, though evidence for this remains circumstantial. More certainly, tin traveled overland across Gaul to Mediterranean ports, carried by successive traders through Celtic territories. Some tin probably moved through river systems like the Loire and Garonne, then onward via shorter sea routes. The multiplicity of possible paths reflects how valuable tin was and how many peoples sought to profit from its transport. The secrecy surrounding the Tin Islands route created persistent myths and confusion in ancient literature. Greek and Roman writers provided contradictory descriptions of tin sources, mixing fact with fiction. Phoenician traders allegedly spread false stories about dangerous sea monsters and treacherous waters to discourage competitors. One famous tale recounts how a Phoenician captain deliberately wrecked his ship rather than allow Roman vessels following him to discover his destination, and was rewarded by his government for protecting the secret. Cornwall's tin mining has archaeological evidence stretching back to the Bronze Age. The metal was initially collected from stream deposits, then later extracted from underground mines. Cornish tin supported Bronze Age civilizations throughout Europe and the Mediterranean. The trade created Cornwall's first significant contact with wider world, bringing Mediterranean goods and influences to distant Britain. The tin trade remained important through Roman and medieval periods, continuing into the modern industrial age. 25. The cinnabar route, Spain to Rome. Cinnabar, a brilliant red mercury sulfide mineral, was one of the most sought-after pigments in the ancient world. The finest and most abundant cinnabar came from the mines of Almaden in Spain, which have been worked continuously for over 2,000 years, making them possibly the oldest functioning mines on Earth. The Romans prized cinnabar not only for its vivid vermilion color, but also as the source of mercury, which they used in gold extraction and believed had medicinal properties despite its toxicity. The Roman demand for Spanish cinnabar was enormous. The mineral adorned the walls of wealthy homes and public buildings throughout the empire. Cinnabar-derived vermilion was the color of triumph and celebration, used to paint the faces of victorious generals during triumphal processions. The pigment appeared in frescoes at Pompeii and Rome's grandest structures. Mercury extracted from cinnabar was used in gold amalgamation processes, enabling more efficient gold mining throughout the empire. Working the cinnabar mines was notoriously dangerous and deadly. The Romans primarily used slave labor and condemned criminals in these mines, where workers faced mercury poisoning, lung disease from toxic dust, and frequent accidents. Life expectancy in the mines was measured in months rather than years. Despite these horrific conditions, the mines operated continuously because cinnabar's value was so high. Guards strictly controlled access to prevent theft, as even small amounts were extremely valuable. The route from Almaden to Rome involved overland transport to Spanish ports, then shipment across the Mediterranean. The Romans maintained strict state control over cinnabar production and trade, recognizing its strategic importance. Price controls attempted to regulate the market, though demand consistently exceeded supply. The Almaden mines survived the Roman Empire's fall and continued operating through medieval and modern periods, finally closing only recently after over 2 millennia of nearly continuous extraction. 26. The pearl trade routes, Persian Gulf. The Persian Gulf's warm, shallow waters provided ideal conditions for oyster beds producing some of the ancient world's finest pearls. For over 4,000 years, divers from coastal settlements around modern Bahrain, Kuwait, and the Arabian coast descended into these waters to retrieve pearls, creating a trade network extending from India to the Mediterranean. These lustrous gems formed by chance inside living oysters symbolize purity, wealth, and beauty across multiple cultures. The pearl trade enriched Gulf civilizations and connected them to distant markets. Pearl diving was dangerous, skilled work passed down through generations. Divers descended without equipment, holding their breath for several minutes while searching oyster beds on the seafloor. They faced risks including drowning, shark attacks, and decompression injuries. The season ran during summer months when waters were warmest, though still exhausting work under the intense Gulf sun. Divers developed remarkable lung capacity and techniques for rapid descent and ascent. Each oyster harvested might or might not contain a pearl, making it uncertain, hopeful work. Bahrain, known to ancient Mesopotamians as Dilmun, became the center of the pearl trade. Dilmun served as a crucial trading hub, connecting Mesopotamia with the Indus Valley and Arabian coast. Sumerian texts mention Dilmun pearls 4,000 years ago. The island's strategic location and freshwater springs made it ideal as a trading entrepot. Merchants gathered pearls from throughout the Gulf, sorted them by size and quality, then shipped them to distant markets. Pearls from the Persian Gulf adorned Egyptian pharaohs, Persian kings, Roman emperors, and Indian maharajas. They featured in religious artifacts across multiple faiths. The trade created sophisticated grading systems and established markets in cities throughout the ancient world. Arab merchants dominated the trade for centuries, developing expertise in pearl evaluation that became legendary. The natural pearl trade declined only in the 20th century when Japanese cultured pearls flooded markets, ending the Gulf's 4,000-year monopoly. 27. The ivory routes, East Africa. African elephant ivory was one of the most prized materials in the ancient world, valued for its beauty, workability, and rarity outside Africa. Ivory trade routes from East Africa extended inland from coastal ports, reaching deep into the African interior where elephant populations thrived. These routes connected African kingdoms with Indian Ocean trade networks, bringing African ivory to markets in Arabia, India, China, and eventually Europe. The ivory trade enriched coastal city-states and motivated extensive exploration of the African interior. East African ivory was particularly valued for its quality. African elephant tusks were larger than Asian elephant tusks and had desirable color and texture. The ivory came from elephants hunted in the interior regions of what is now Kenya, Tanzania, and Mozambique. African hunters developed specialized techniques for taking elephants, then transported the heavy tusks to coastal trading centers. The journey from interior hunting grounds to coast could take months, following footpaths through varied terrain. Coastal city-states like Kilwa, Mombasa, and Sofala grew wealthy from the ivory trade. These Swahili cities served as intermediaries between African interior regions and Indian Ocean merchants. Arab, Persian, and later Indian traders arrived during monsoon sailing seasons, exchanging cloth, beads, metal goods, and other products for ivory, gold, and other African commodities. The trade created multicultural urban centers where African, Arab, and Asian influences mingled, producing the distinctive Swahili culture and language. Ivory served many purposes in receiving markets. It was carved into decorative objects, jewelry, religious artifacts, and luxury items. Indian craftsmen created intricate ivory sculptures. Chinese artisans carved ivory into elaborate works of art. European demand grew significantly during medieval and later periods. The ivory trade had lasting impacts, both enriching African societies and eventually contributing to tragic overexploitation of elephant populations. Ancient trade patterns established routes that continued operating into the colonial period and beyond. 28. The ochre trade networks, prehistoric Europe. Ochre, an iron oxide pigment producing colors from yellow to deep red, was one of humanity's first trade goods. Archaeological evidence reveals that ochre moved considerable distances in prehistoric Europe from at least 100,000 years ago. Certain ochre sources produced material with distinctive color, texture, and quality characteristics, making them particularly valuable. Stone Age peoples traveled significant distances to obtain high-quality ochre or traded for it through intermediary groups, establishing some of humanity's earliest long-distance exchange networks. Ochre served multiple purposes in prehistoric societies beyond simple decoration. The pigment appeared in burial ceremonies across cultures and millennia, with bodies often covered in red ochre before interment. This practice suggests spiritual or religious significance, possibly symbolizing blood, life, or rebirth. Ochre was used in cave paintings, creating the magnificent prehistoric art of Lascaux, Altamira, and countless other sites. It served as body paint for ceremonies and possibly everyday decoration. Ochre mixed with fat produced protective coating for skin and leather, while also possibly serving as an insect repellent. Specific ochre sources became renowned for exceptional quality. The hematite mines of Swaziland in southern Africa show mining activity dating back 40,000 years or more, making them among the oldest mines known. In Europe, certain deposits produced ochre with vibrant, stable colors that prehistoric peoples clearly preferred. The effort invested in obtaining quality ochre, sometimes involving journeys of hundreds of miles, demonstrates how highly valued this pigment was. The ochre trade networks reveal surprising sophistication in prehistoric societies. These early humans maintained relationships with distant groups, understood resource distribution across wide regions, and established exchange systems functioning without written records or formal markets. Distinctive ochre appearing far from its source demonstrates that prehistoric peoples engaged in regular, long-distance interaction. These ancient networks laid the groundwork for all subsequent human trade, representing the deep roots of our commercial instincts. 29. The cowrie shell routes, Indian Ocean to Africa. Small, glossy cowrie shells from the Indian Ocean became one of history's most widespread forms of currency, traveling vast distances from their tropical marine habitats to serve as money throughout Africa and parts of Asia. The shells, primarily from Maldivian and East African waters, moved along extensive trade routes reaching deep into the African continent. Cowrie shells served as currency in West Africa well into the 20th century, representing an extraordinarily long-lived monetary system based on natural objects gathered from the sea. Cowrie shells possessed several characteristics making them ideal as currency. They were durable, difficult to counterfeit, small and portable, and naturally limited in supply, providing inherent value. The shells were beautiful, with a glossy finish and attractive patterns. Their use as money required no processing or manufacturing beyond collection. Different species and sizes had different values, allowing for a graduated currency system. The shell's uniformity made counting and accounting relatively straightforward. The routes carrying cowries from the Indian Ocean to West Africa were complex and multi-staged. Shells collected in the Maldives traveled to Indian ports, then to Arabian or East African entrepôts. From East African coast, cowries moved inland along trade routes, eventually reaching the Trans-Saharan routes. Saharan merchants carried cowries south into West Africa, where they became deeply embedded in local economies. The distances involved were extraordinary, with shells traveling 5,000 miles or more from collection point to final use. Cowrie currency influenced African history significantly. The shells facilitated trade, allowing for more complex economic transactions than barter permitted. They served in bride prices, tax payments, and religious offerings. Unfortunately, cowries also figured in the slave trade, with European traders importing massive quantities to purchase enslaved people. The impact of cowrie shell inflation on African economies remains debated by historians. The shell's use as currency represents a fascinating intersection of nature, commerce, and culture spanning continents and millennia. 30. The obsidian roots of Mesoamerica. Obsidian held special significance in Mesoamerican civilizations, serving practical, artistic, and spiritual purposes. Major obsidian sources in central Mexico, particularly near present-day Pachuca, and around volcanic zones, supplied this volcanic glass throughout Mesoamerica. The Aztecs, Maya, and earlier civilizations depended on obsidian for tools, weapons, and ritual objects. Trade routes carrying obsidian created economic and political connections, linking diverse Mesoamerican peoples from central Mexico to modern Honduras and beyond. Mesoamerican obsidian came in several varieties, each with distinctive characteristics. Green obsidian from Pachuca was especially prized for its translucent beauty and workability. Black obsidian from other sources served for most utilitarian purposes. The different obsidian sources had distinctive chemical signatures, allowing archaeologists to trace obsidian artifacts back to specific volcanic sources. This research reveals extensive trade networks operating for thousands of years, with some obsidian traveling over 600 miles from source to final destination. Obsidian crafting was a specialized skill. Master craftsmen used pressure flaking techniques to create incredibly thin, sharp blades from obsidian cores. These blades were sharper than modern surgical steel, though more fragile. Obsidian served for practical cutting tasks, but also for ceremonial purposes. Aztec priests used obsidian knives in religious rituals. Warriors carried obsidian-edged weapons called macuahuitl, wooden clubs with obsidian blades embedded along the edges. Mirrors made from polished obsidian held religious significance, believed to allow communication with the spirit world. The obsidian trade was controlled by powerful merchants and ruling elites. The Aztec Empire maintained some monopolistic control over certain obsidian sources, using access to this vital material as a tool of political power. Major market centers like Tenochtitlan and Cholula featured obsidian vendors selling finished tools and raw material. The routes carrying obsidian often followed the same paths as other trade goods, creating integrated commercial networks that sustained Mesoamerican civilization. The obsidian trade continued until Spanish conquest disrupted traditional patterns. Though obsidian crafting persists in some communities today,